Jack was a quiet man who lived alone on the edge of a small village. He had no friends, no family nearby, and no interest in city life. All he cared about was his small garden where he grew fresh vegetables every day, tomatoes, carrots, cabbage, and potatoes his pride. He found peace in the soil, in the sound of birds, and the smell of the earth. But lately, something strange had started happening. Every morning, when Jack went out to his garden, he noticed vegetables missing. At first, he thought maybe it was animals, rabbits, maybe even deer, but the bites were clean. The vegetables were picked carefully, not eaten roughly. He found no footprints, no broken fences, and nothing on the ground. After 3 days of missing vegetables, Jack installed a camera. He set it up near the tomato plants and waited. The next morning, he ran to check the footage. The camera showed nothing, no movement, no intruders. And yet more vegetables were gone. This doesn't make sense, Jack muttered to himself. He was a former soldier, trained to notice small things, and this was no ordinary thief. So that night, Jack made a plan. He took his old army flashlight, grabbed a small stun gun, and hid behind a tree near the garden. He waited in the dark, completely silent. Hours passed. The wind blew softly, and the night was quiet. Just when Jack started thinking it was useless, he saw something move, not a sound, not a step, just a shimmer like a heat wave in the air. He narrowed his eyes and raised his flashlight slowly. And then suddenly, a figure appeared out of nowhere. It was a woman, but not human. Her skin was light blue. Her eyes were big and glowing softly. And she wore something strange like a suit made of glass. She moved quickly, carefully picking vegetables and placing them into a small glowing bag. Jack stepped out from the shadows and shouted, "Stop right there!" The woman froze, dropped the bag, and turned slowly. Jack pointed the stun gun at her, his hand steady. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" he asked firmly. The alien woman raised her hand slowly, her eyes wide and full of fear. "Please," she said in a soft voice, "don't hurt me." Jack was stunned, not because she spoke, but because she spoke in English. "You can speak?" he asked, lowering the gun slightly. "Yes," she replied. "I learned from your broadcasts, from your signals in the air." He stepped closer, still cautious. "Why are you stealing my vegetables?" he asked. The woman looked down, ashamed. "My children are hungry," she said, her voice trembling. "We crashed here months ago. My ship is broken. I have no way to feed them." Jack paused, unsure what to say. His soldier's heart was trained for battle, not sympathy, but this was no enemy. "Where are your children?" he asked. She looked toward the dark forest nearby. "They are hiding there, too weak to walk. I only come here at night so you won't see me." Jack looked at her, really looked at her. She was thin, tired, and scared, but not dangerous. "You should have just asked," he said, lowering the gun completely. "I didn't think you would help," she whispered. Jack took a deep breath. "Follow me," he said. "Let's bring your children here. I can't promise much, but I can give you food." She looked surprised, even confused. "You would help me? A stranger from another world?" Jack nodded slowly. "I've seen worse than you, lady, and if your kids are in trouble, I can't just ignore that." Together they walked toward the forest. The alien woman moved carefully, whispering softly into a device on her wrist. Moments later, 2 small figures appeared from behind a tree. They were children, maybe 6 or 7 years old by human guess. They looked pale, thin, and scared. Holding each other's hands, Jack knelt down slowly, showing them he wasn't a threat. "It's okay," he said gently. "Come with us." The kids hesitated, then walked forward, holding tightly to their mother's cloak. Jack led them all to his barn, opened the doors, and made space with blankets and food. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "Thank you," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "My name is Lyra," she added. "Jack," he replied. "Just Jack." As he locked the barn door behind him, he looked up at the stars. Something deep inside told him this was just the beginning. The night was quiet, but in the distance, a strange humming sound echoed in the sky. Lyra's eyes widened. "They found me," she whispered. Jack looked at her sharply. "Who?" he asked. She turned to him, her voice shaking. "The ones who want us dead." The sun rose slowly, casting a golden light over the fields, but Jack didn't notice the beauty of the morning. He sat outside the barn, holding a cup of coffee, staring. At the locked doors, inside, an alien family was sleeping. And Jack was trying to understand how his quiet life had changed overnight. Just one day ago, he was a lonely farmer. Now he was hiding an alien mother and her 2 children in his barn. It sounded like something from a comic book, but it was real, too real. Inside the barn, Lyra opened her eyes. Her children were still sleeping, their tiny hands clutching pieces of bread Jack had given them. She touched their foreheads gently, her fingers glowing faintly. A small smile appeared on her face, but it didn't last long. Her eyes went to the corner of the barn, where her broken tech was hidden under hay. Jack entered with a tray of food, eggs, toast, and some milk. "I don't know what you eat, but this is all I have," he said. Trying to sound calm, Lyra stood up, her back straight, even though she looked exhausted. "Thank you, Jack," she said softly. "Your kindness. It's rare." Jack didn't know how to reply. He just nodded and looked around the barn. "Last night you said they found you," he asked. "Who are they?" Lyra sat down beside her children and looked up, her face serious. "They are called the Scarn," she began. "Hunters, soldiers, killers. They follow the weak, destroy the broken, and erase those who run." Jack listened carefully, his instincts waking up again. He hadn't felt this alert since the war. "I escaped from them 6 months ago," Lyra continued. "I was a scientist in my world, but when the Scarn invaded, everything changed." She paused and looked down. "They took everything, my people, my home, my husband." Jack tightened his grip on the tray. He didn't speak, but something inside him shifted. Lyra noticed. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You could have turned me in, or done worse." Jack looked at her children. "I've seen enough war to know what helpless looks like," he replied. "And you don't look like a threat." Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Lyra stood and walked to the corner of the barn. She pulled back some hay, revealing a small silver box. Jack stepped closer, curious. "This is part of my ship," she said. "It still works, but only just." She pressed a button, and a blue hologram appeared. Stars, maps, and strange symbols floated in the air. "My escape pod landed far from here, in the forest, but most of it was destroyed." She pointed to a blinking red dot on the map. "The Scarn left a tracker in me, deep inside my shoulder. I removed it too late." Jack stared at the glowing map. "So they followed you here because of that thing?" Lyra nodded. "They don't give up," she said. "They destroy until nothing is left." Suddenly, one of the kids coughed a deep, weak sound. Jack rushed over, placing his hand on the child's back. "He's burning up," Jack said. Feeling the heat, Lyra looked worried. "They're not built for your atmosphere. I need supplies, herbs or something close to our medicine." Jack stood up. "There's an old vet I know lives out by the river," he said. "Maybe he has something that can help." Lyra looked at him with wide eyes. "You would risk it?" Jack nodded. "I've risked worse for people I didn't even like," he said. "Your kid deserves a chance." He grabbed his coat and left the barn, heading toward his truck. As he drove away, Lyra stood in the doorway, holding her child close. The wind blew gently, but her heart was racing. Inside the barn, the silver box beeped softly. A red light started flashing, unseen by Lyra. A tiny spider-like machine crawled out from the box. It climbed up the barn wall and out through a crack, disappearing into the trees. Hours passed before Jack returned, holding a small bag of supplies. He rushed into the barn and handed Lyra the medicines. She crushed some leaves, mixed them with liquid, and fed them to the child. Slowly, the coughing stopped, and his breathing became easier. Jack sighed in relief. "I think we bought some time," he said. But Lyra didn't smile. She looked toward the sky, her face pale. "They know," she whispered. "The beacon inside the box, it activated on its own." Jack turned sharply. "You mean they're coming here?" Lyra nodded. "Soon," she said. "Very soon." Jack's hands curled into fists. "If they want a fight," he said, "they just picked the wrong farm." The sky changed that evening. It turned darker than usual, not because of clouds, but because something heavy was moving above. Birds flew in strange patterns. Dogs barked for no reason, and even the wind seemed nervous. Jack stood on the roof of his barn, holding binoculars. What he saw wasn't natural. A shimmer, almost like the sky itself had cracked for a second, then healed again. He had seen that kind of shimmer once before, in war, when a stealth drone passed overhead. But this wasn't human tech inside the barn. Lyra was checking her silver box. The beacon had gone silent, but that didn't mean they were safe. Sometimes silence meant the hunters were already nearby. The Skarn didn't always send warnings. They preferred surprise. Jack came down from the roof and entered the barn quickly. "They're close," he said. "I can feel it." Lyra looked up and nodded. "I know. They're scanning the area with cloaked drones." She opened another small box, pulled out a piece of clear stone glowing softly. "This will help us see them," she said, handing it to Jack. He stared at the crystal, unsure what to do. "Hold it near your eye just for a second," she said. Jack did, and for a brief moment, he saw them. Dark flying machines circling high above, hidden from normal sight. "That's them?" Jack asked. "Yes," Lyra replied. "Skarn scouts, preparing for a ground strike." Jack took a deep breath. "Then we need to prepare too," he said, his voice calm but cold. Jack didn't waste time. He went to his shed and pulled out his old military trunk. Inside were tools he hadn't touched in years: tripwires, shock mines, camouflage netting, and a dusty black rifle. He never thought he'd use any of it again. "I'm going to defend this place," he said, loading his weapon. "You should take your kids and run." But Lyra shook her head. "If we run, they'll find us again. But if we stand and fight now, maybe they'll stop." Jack was surprised by her bravery. "You know how to fight?" he asked. "Not like you," she said, "but I know how to protect." Together, they turned the barn into a fortress. Jack placed traps along the fence line, dug small holes, and filled them with sharpened sticks. Lyra used her alien tech to create energy barriers near the doors and windows. Night fell fast, and with it came a silence too heavy to ignore. Jack sat inside the barn with Lyra and the children, all of them alert. Suddenly, the barn's lights flickered, then turned off completely. Lyra whispered, "They're jamming power signals." The youngest child whimpered, and Jack gently put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "Stay with your mom." He stepped outside into the night, the rifle tight in his grip. He heard it before he saw it, a faint buzzing sound, low and metallic. One of the traps near the garden triggered with a loud snap, followed by sparks. Jack ran to the spot and saw a damaged drone twitching on the ground. He aimed and fired one clean shot, blasting it into pieces. Suddenly, a dark shape dropped from the sky, landing hard just meters away. The Skarn soldier was tall, armored, and holding a weapon that looked like it was made from bone and fire. Jack didn't wait. He threw a flash grenade, blinding the creature for a few seconds, then tackled it with full force. The fight was rough. The Skarn was strong, but Jack was smarter. He managed to stab it with a broken pipe, then roll away as it screamed in pain. He returned to the barn, breathless. "There's more coming," he said. "That was just the first." Lyra looked serious. "If they're sending soldiers already, it means the commander is close." She reached into her box and pulled out something wrapped in dark cloth. When she opened it, Jack saw a glowing cube with lines of golden light. "What's that?" he asked. Lyra looked at him and said quietly, "This is what they're really after." Jack raised an eyebrow. "More important than your life?" She nodded. This cube contains codes, blueprints, and DNA records of my entire species. Jack stared at the cube, stunned. If they get this, they erase your race completely. Yes, she whispered. That's why I ran. Not just for my kids, but for this. Before Jack could respond, the barn shook violently. A beam of red light cut through the sky and hit the field nearby. They found us, Lyra said, holding the cube tightly. Then we hold them off. Jack replied, loading his weapon again. The children hid under the blankets. Holding each other, Jack and Lyra stood at the door, side by side. A human soldier and an alien queen, both ready to protect one small barn that held more than just vegetables. It now held the future of a forgotten world. Asterisk, the ground still smoked from the last Scarn strike. The field that once grew Jack's carrots was now a black circle of ash and silence. The air smelled like fire and electricity, and the sky above had turned a strange silver color. This wasn't just a chase anymore. This was war. Jack stood at the edge of the blast zone, his face hard and his thoughts louder than the wind. Behind him, Lyra held the glowing cube close to her chest, her children silent beside her. They all knew the same truth. If the Scarn returned tonight, they wouldn't stop until everything was gone. We need to move them, Jack said. The kids, the cube, all of it. The barn won't hold if they hit us full force. Lyra shook her head. They're watching from above. Any movement, and they'll strike again. Jack clenched his jaw. Then we prepare right here, he said. We turned this farm into a battlefield, but this time he couldn't do it alone. He opened an old metal box in his truck and pulled out a dusty satellite phone. He hesitated for a moment, then dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A deep voice answered. Jack, you still breathing? Barely, Jack replied. I need a favor. There was a pause, then the voice said, send me your coordinates. 2 hours later, a black van rolled up the dirt road. Inside were 3 people, former soldiers like Jack, each one carrying gear and scars. No questions were asked, just nods and quiet handshakes. They saw the burns in the field, the strange alien device, the kids, and the fear in Lyra's eyes. That was enough. Jack looked at his team and spoke like a commander again. We're not just protecting them, he said. We're protecting something bigger than any of us. He pointed to the sky. There. Out there, and they're coming. We have one night to get ready. The team moved fast. They built underground tunnels from the barn to the old tool shed. They planted traps in the field, spike pits, stun wires, motion sensors, and homemade EMP charges. Lyra helped too, using alien tech to charge batteries with strange glowing cells. She turned Jack's rusty windmill into a pulse emitter that could disable Scarn drones. Even the kids helped, stacking food, moving supplies, and watching the monitors. They didn't cry anymore. They had seen too much. Jack noticed it, the same look he once had as a young soldier, the look of someone who lost childhood too early. As the sun went down, the farm looked quiet from above, but underground and behind the walls, it was a different world, one filled with weapons, plans, and silent determination. Jack sat beside Lyra, sharpening a knife. You said you were a scientist, he said. How did you learn to fight? She looked at the stars for a moment before answering. I didn't, she said. I only learned how to survive. Jack nodded. I guess that's all war really is. Suddenly one of the monitors flashed red. A Scarn probe had entered the outer perimeter. Jack stood up fast, checking his rifle. They're testing our defenses, he said. Which means the real attack is coming next. Lyra placed the cube inside a metal case, locking it tight. If they get this, everything is lost, she said. Jack took the case from her and slid it into the tunnel under the floor. They won't, he promised. Not while I'm breathing, just then. The youngest child tugged at Jack's sleeve. Are we going to die? The boy asked quietly. Jack knelt down, looked him in the eye, and replied, Not today. The child nodded slowly and went back to the others. Jack stood and looked around the room, at his team, at Lyra, at the blinking lights and loaded weapons. He felt something rise in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. "I never thought I'd fight again," Jack said. "Not after what I left behind." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not just fighting for me," she said. "You're fighting for every life the Skarn want to erase." Outside, the wind stopped. A deep humming filled the air like a storm coming from the stars. Lights moved behind the clouds, slow and silent. The Skarn ship had arrived. Jack loaded his rifle and stepped outside, his boots crunching the dirt. He looked up and whispered to himself, "This is my land, and I'm not giving it up." Behind him, the barn lights flickered, the traps armed themselves, and the team took positions. The night was no longer quiet, it was waiting. The ground vibrated before the sound even reached them, a low rumble like thunder trapped beneath the soil. Jack knew that feeling. It was the calm just before everything exploded. But this time, it wasn't a memory from the battlefield. It was happening here on his land tonight. He stood in the doorway of the barn, the rifle firm in his grip. His team spread out across the property, each one hidden, watching, waiting. Lyra stood beside the children, whispering something in their language. It sounded like a promise and a goodbye at the same time. Above the clouds, the Skarn warship finally revealed itself. It was massive, shaped like a jagged blade, with glowing veins of red pulsing along its surface. No windows, no engines that could be seen, just silent, hovering death. Then, like falling stars, dark objects began dropping from the ship. Skarn warriors, armored and armed, landed with force that shook the barn walls. They didn't speak, didn't warn. They came to erase. The first explosion hit the north field, tearing a hole where Jack had planted potatoes last spring. But under that soil was a hidden mine. As two Skarn moved forward, the ground erupted, blasting them back in flames. Jack gave the signal, one sharp whistle, and the entire property lit up like a storm. Spotlights flashed, traps triggered, and pulse weapons hidden in fence posts fired at anything that moved. The team fought like ghosts, quick, silent, brutal. Jack rolled behind a broken tractor, aimed, and shot a Skarn directly in the chest. It staggered, then collapsed in a pile of metal and flesh. Inside the barn, Lyra activated a shimmering shield. Around the children, it flickered, unstable, but it would buy time. She turned to the silver box and tapped commands furiously. One of the Skarn broke through the side wall, roaring as it entered. Lyra spun and fired a blast of blue energy from her palm. The creature flew backward into a pile of tools, screaming, outside. The wind howled as the Skarn leader arrived. He was larger than the others, with armor that pulsed like a heartbeat. Jack saw him and froze for just a second. This one was different, calm, confident, cruel. The leader walked through the fire and debris like nothing mattered. He raised one hand and pointed at the barn. 3 Skarn warriors charged forward, ignoring the traps. Jack shouted, "Now!" A net of electric wire dropped from the roof, wrapping 2 of them in crackling blue light. The third leapt over, only to be tackled by one of Jack's team hiding behind the haystacks. Back inside, Lyra looked at the cube. Its light was growing dim, its power draining fast. She whispered to it, not in English, but in her own tongue, words filled with pain and hope. Then, the barn roof cracked open. The Skarn leader dropped inside like a shadow. Jack turned and fired 3 shots, but the bullets bounced off his armor. The leader raised his arm, and a blade formed from his wrist. "Give me the cube," he said in a deep, unnatural voice. His first words, Lyra stood in front of her children. "No," she said, her voice steady. "You won't have it." Jack stepped between them. "You want the cube," he said. "Come and get it." The Skarn leader charged, and Jack met him. Head on, metal clashed, sparks flew, and both crashed into the ground. They rolled, fought, and struck with fury, but the Skarn was stronger. It threw Jack across the room with one massive swing. Jack hit the wall hard, groaning in pain. The Skarn turned toward Lyra, but before he could move, a blast of golden light struck him from behind. Lyra was holding the cube. It had activated on its own. The light grew brighter, and the Skarn screamed. His armor cracked, his body shook, and he vanished in a burst of white flame. Silence followed. Smoke rose from the ruins. The cube dimmed again, falling from Lyra's hand. She collapsed to her knees, breathless. Jack crawled over, bleeding. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "We stopped him," she said. But just as Jack stood up, a sound echoed above. Another signal from the sky, deeper, colder. The war wasn't over. The Skarn leader was just one piece of something far bigger. Suddenly, the captured drone from earlier beeped and displayed a message. Lyra walked over and read it silently. Then she looked at Jack, her face pale. "They know who you are now," she said. Jack frowned. "What does that mean?" Lyra took a shaky breath and replied, "They think you're one of us now." The stars were still glowing above, but the earth below was broken. Fires burned in the fields, and smoke painted the sky with gray lines. Jack sat on the back steps of his house, his hands covered in dust and blood. The war wasn't over, but for now. The night was quiet. Lyra walked out of the barn, her face pale, the cube still clutched in her hand. But it was no longer just a glowing object. It was something heavier now, a burden, a key, a crown. Jack looked up at her as she approached. "You all right?" he asked. Lyra nodded, but her eyes told a different story. She sat beside him, holding the cube on her lap. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Something worse than what we've already seen?" Lyra didn't smile. She looked down at the cube and whispered, "This cube doesn't just carry memories of my people. It carries their future." Jack stayed quiet, listening. "I wasn't just a scientist," she said. "I was chosen to protect this." She paused, then added softly, "in my world, that makes me Queen." Jack blinked, then laughed once. "Well, Your Majesty," he said. "That explains a lot." But Lyra didn't laugh. She stood up, looking out at the burning field. "The Skarn knew," she said. "That's why they chased me across galaxies. They knew I held the key to rebuilding everything they destroyed." Jack stood beside her, silent for a moment. "So what now?" he asked. "I have to find the vault," she said. "It's hidden somewhere deep in your mountains. My people built it 1,000 years ago when Earth was still young." Jack frowned. "You're saying there's alien tech buried under our hills?" Lyra nodded. "It was a last resort, a safe box for our future, if we ever lost everything." Jack looked at the burned land, then at the children sleeping in the barn. "Then we find it," he said. "Before they do, the next morning." They packed quickly. Jack loaded his truck with weapons, tools, food, and water. Lyra used her tech to scan a map and find the vault signal. It was deep in a mountain range called Black Hollow, a place even locals feared to visit. They didn't tell the kids where they were going, only that they'd be safe with Jack's team while he and Lyra were gone. The youngest one hugged Jack tightly. "You'll come back?" he asked. Jack smiled and said, "Count on it." The road to Black Hollow was rough, old and cracked, twisting through dead forests and foggy hills. Jack drove in silence while Lyra scanned the cube again. "Once we reach the entrance, we have one chance to activate it," she said. "After that, the signal will reach across the stars." Jack glanced at her. "Won't that bring the Skarn faster?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, but it will also bring survivors, my people. Others who thought we were lost." Hours passed before they reached the base of the mountain. An old cave entrance hidden behind vines welcomed them with cold air and silence. Lyra stepped forward, the cube in her hands glowing brighter with each step. "This is it," she whispered. She touched the wall and a doorway appeared smooth, metallic, and covered in strange symbols. Inside, the vault was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. Tall crystal towers, floating panels, and walls that changed color with every breath. At the center was a circular platform with a small pedestal. Lyra walked up slowly and placed the cube inside. Lights shot across the room, forming images of her people's cities, families, stars, and memories. Tears ran down her cheeks. "They're all gone," she said. "But now they have a chance to come back." Suddenly, alarms blared, the vault shook, and Jack raised his gun. "They found us," he said. A loud voice echoed through the chamber. "Hand over the queen." It was the Scarn commander, alive and angrier than ever. He stepped through the door with 5 more soldiers, weapons glowing red. Jack moved in front of Lyra. "Get back," he said. But Lyra shook her head. "No," she said. "This is my choice." She stepped forward, holding the cube. "Hi, I am Lyra, daughter of Solon, last queen of Virex," she declared. "You may take my life, but you will never take my people's future." The cube glowed brighter and brighter until the entire room was covered in white light. The Scarn screamed, firing their weapons. Jack dove forward, tackling Lyra, shielding her as the cube released a pulse so strong it threw every enemy to the floor. Silence fell again, smoke rose, and the cube rested on the pedestal, dim but alive. Jack stood slowly, helping Lyra up. "You okay?" he asked. She looked at him, smiling through her tears. "I made my choice," she said, "and I chose hope." The vault doors closed behind them with a deep metallic thud. Dust settled in the air, and the cube pulsed gently on its pedestal like a sleeping heart. Jack and Lyra stood in silence, staring at what they had just survived, but this wasn't the end. This was the calm before the real storm. Outside, the sky had changed color. A swirling mass of black and red clouds circled above the mountains. The Scarn mothership had arrived, and this time, it wasn't sending scouts, it was bringing an army. Jack climbed to the highest ridge with binoculars in hand. What he saw made his blood turn cold. Dozens of drop pods falling like fireballs, crashing into the hills, trees burning, ground splitting. This wasn't a chase anymore. This was an invasion. He returned to Lyra quickly. "We don't have long," he said. "They're surrounding us from every side." Lyra nodded and walked toward the cube. "It's not ready to move," she said. "We need at least 1 more hour to finish the signal." Jack looked out the window again. "We won't get an hour," he replied. "Not unless we make them fight for every second." Back at the farm, Jack's team was already preparing. The kids had been moved to a hidden underground shelter beneath the old well. Supplies were spread out, weapons reloaded, traps rearmed. No one complained, no one asked questions. They knew what was coming, and they knew what was at stake. Jack made one last call on the satellite radio. He spoke only 5 words. "If anyone's listening, now's the time." Then he dropped the radio and walked away. By evening, the ridge around the vault glowed with red light. Scarn soldiers had formed a perimeter, moving in slowly, carefully, but they didn't know Jack, and they didn't know Earth. The first explosion came from beneath their feet. Homemade mines built from car batteries and alien tech blasted open the ground. Jack and his team opened fire from hidden bunkers. The Scarn pushed forward, but every step they took came with a price. In the vault, Lyra stood over the cube, her hands glowing as she poured her energy into it. The room was shaking, and the light was growing stronger. She whispered names of her lost people, one by one, as if calling them home. Outside, Jack faced off against the Scarn commander again. This time, the alien had new armor, stronger weapons, and burning rage in his eyes. "You should have stayed out of this, human," the Scarn growled. Jack wiped blood from his face and said, "I was out, until you made this my war too." They charged, blades clashing, fists pounding, earth shaking beneath them. Jack fought with everything he had, every scar, every lesson, every memory of friends lost in past battles. He wasn't fighting to win, he was fighting to buy time inside. The cube let out a soft, rising hum. Lyra's eyes glowed completely now. The floor beneath her cracked as the vault filled with alien light. The cube was ready. She pressed her hand to it and whispered, "Send it." A beam of light shot into the sky, cutting through the clouds. It was a signal, a call to any survivors, to any ships hiding in the dark corners. of space. A voice from a dead world crying out. "We are still alive," the Skarn commander noticed the light and roared in fury. But before he could escape, Jack pulled the last grenade from his belt. He smiled and said, "This is for Earth." Then everything went white. When Lyra reached the ridge, all she saw was smoke, but through it, she found Jack burned. Bruised, bleeding, but alive, he looked at her and whispered, "Did it work?" She nodded, tears falling freely. "Yes," she said. "They're coming." Far above them, the stars shifted, one by one. New lights appeared, ships coming out of warp. Alien signals echoed across the sky, each one answering the call, not Skarn, but survivors. All eyes hope. The invasion had failed, but something greater had begun. Back at the farm, the children ran through the garden again. The tomatoes were growing back, the air was clean, and the fields were healing. Jack sat on the porch with Lyra. Beside him, she smiled and said, "You saved more than my family, Jack. You saved a future." He looked out at the stars and replied, "You came here to steal my vegetables." She laughed gently, "And you gave me a home."